You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to July's Foreign Policy Focus live stream. This is the second one that I've done so far. And again, my patron and blogger at the Libertarian Institute, Stephen Woskow, is joining me. So go ahead and say hi, and how you doing? It's been, I guess, about a month now since we talked.
Yep, a lot going on in a month, yeah. Hi, everybody, and glad to be here again.
Yeah. And during that month, you've certainly been active on the Libertarian Institute blog. So everybody, make sure you check out that website, especially the right-hand column, because that's where you're going to find pretty much all the work that me and Steven are doing, whether it's on the blog and the news roundup section or, on the section for the show. Scott and Pete Raymond are doing a great job over there now. And I hope you all are checking that out.
I think Pete's the new editor over there, although it's Pete Quinones now. But I think he's the new editor there, so if people want to submit papers, that's Pete's the one to submit them to.
Yeah, absolutely. I know he's always looking for submissions over there, and there's a lot of people with a lot of great things to say. I thought we'd start off on today's show by talking about the Mueller testimony that happened today. To some people, this was almost religious-like event, like they really thought he was going to come in and give them exactly what they needed to impeach Donald Trump. And I really don't think that happened. From what I was able to watch, and I couldn't make myself suffer through all those hours of it, it was mostly just Mueller kind of stumbling through the report. The only thing that seemed clear to me is either maybe he's a little bit older now and his memory recall isn't so great, or he didn't write a good chunk of that report because he really did not seem to know what was in it, including not really knowing what Fusion GPS was. Did you have a chance to catch any of this hearing today?
I didn't listen to any of the hearings, but just kind of reading recaps from people. No, they didn't seem too impressed, and I know somebody did a screenshot of CNN and they seemed pretty depressed that this was not going to be the thing to take down Trump or anything.
Yeah. The only editorials I saw that seemed pretty happy about it was, from, somebody in the Nation saying that, now we have everything we need to impeach Donald Trump. I think everybody on the, pro-Trump bandwagon is go focus on Ted Lieu's comments and interactions with Mueller. They're kind of saying that what was his point? Oh, yeah, Mueller ended up saying something like we didn't charge Trump because of the Justice Department opinion. And I think that's going to be the big thing that they're looking on. Of course, this is all the charges that they're talking about now are the obstruction charges. They're not even the actual kind of foundation of Russiagate. So the goalposts have all the way shift now. We're not really talking about hacking the election and Russia stealing the election for Donald Trump. We're talking about if Donald Trump obstructed an investigation of a false claim.
Yeah, and I think he went in the afternoon. I read that he went back and clarified his comments to Ted Lieu also, and said something about him, clarified him somehow that which again seemed to deflate people after that.
Yeah. And other than that, I thought that, who is it? Jim Jordan. He's a congressman, I believe, who did a pretty good job at crossing Mueller and just asking him questions specifically about Masood and then other, Western intelligence assets who had all these very odd conversations and interactions with George Papadopoulos and the FISA warrant against Carter Page. It really tried to get Mueller to talk about why he didn't charge Masood for lying to the FBI. And so I thought that was a great line of questioning there and a very kind of interesting part of the testimony. But other than that, I thought was mostly a dud. And that is what Andrew McCarthy pointed out yesterday at the Hill, was that with the restrictions the district judge had already put on Mueller, he couldn't even talk about a big part of his case dealing with the Internet Research Agency and his allegations that they were Russian tied. And so that was a whole portion of his case. And then the Barr put further restrictions on him saying, talk only about what was in the report. And he definitely used that to his advantage when he didn't want to answer a question.
Yeah, it didn't sound like there was much there. I would expect you're not going to hear much about this from going forward, that the Democrats are going to kind of drop this line.
Well, I guess that is part of my hope. I've actually gotten a little bit tired of talking about this, believe it or not, after all the shows I've done on it and everything. But at the same time, we do have this Horowitz report coming out at some point in the future. And that will be interesting because I think that's really the investigation into all the possible nefarious conduct by the FBI throughout this whole Russiagate thing. And so while the whole the conspiracy itself is dead, maybe not the whole, conspiracy about the conspiracy, what the FBI was doing to try to undermine the Trump campaign and then, the Trump administration. Yeah,
I don't think the Republicans are going to let that one go. I think they're going to keep on that. You have people like David Nunes who have been on that a long time, and I think they're going to stay on that one too. And even Bill Barr, I think they're going to continue on that line. But I don't see, as far as the Democrats go, and being able to use that to impeach Trump, I think that seems pretty much like it's a dead issue.
Yeah, so I guess that's about all I have from the Mueller testimony for today. There's going to be, I'm sure, some articles coming out. I'm sure Aaron Mate will do a really good job of picking through it and finding maybe some other things worth highlighting. But, overall a dud. One thing that certainly isn't a dud right now, and that is U.S. tensions with Iran. And that's something that you've really been keeping up with on the Libertarian Institute blog. So I'll go ahead and give you a couple minutes to talk about what you've been writing there.
Well, a lot of just trying to keep up with what's going on. A lot of people, with Trump, it's just so up and down. One day he says some things and you think, oh, there's some hope they're going to do some negotiation. And then the next day, he's talking about, well, I don't care if we have a war or not. And you just never know with him. He just so, you hear one day he's got Rand Paul out there trying to negotiate something with them, which is great. That would be great if Rand Paul would be involved in that. And then you hear something come out from Bolton, that Bolton was the instigator of this whole thing with the UK and their oil ship, and that he was the one that convinced the UK to do all this. And so you just never know with him, one way or the other, where he's really going. Sometimes I think it's just bluster, and sometimes I just don't know. He's he's a little older than me, and for those of us, and you're younger, for those of us who lived through the Iranian hostage crisis, it was a big deal. I mean, I don't think people understand that, especially younger people who weren't there. When that was going on, it was headline news every night. And all you had was 3 news stations, ABC, NBC, CBS, that you could watch. And every night they started with the thing of how many days the Iran hostage, day 100 of the Iran hostage crisis, day 200. And it went on for over a year. And it was the first news item every night. And then when the rescue attempt, I don't know if you remember that, they actually had a rescue attempt there, when Jimmy Carter was president. And it was such a disaster. And you saw news of, downed American helicopters, American pilots being drugged through the streets, and Iranians shouting death to America. And that's a hard one to take. I mean, even, for somebody like me, I'm not, any kind of super militaristic patriot or anything, but boy, watching that on TV, it sticks with you. And Trump's of that era, and I think that's, for people that went through that, it's a hard one to get over.
So one direction I want to shift, because we do actually have a question from one of the patrons. What do you think the fallout to the strategic credibility, I guess, of the U.S. will be now that it seems Iran has the ability to protect itself? And I guess, just elaborate on that, I would say that Iran has shown they could at least wage a somewhat asymmetric campaign against what the U.S. and other Western countries are trying to do to Iran to inflict at least enough harm that it's not worth doing. And so the UK isn't going to continue to seize and hold Iranian ships if Iran is seizing and holding UK ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. depending on what you think about, either the lipid mine or the drone attacks on those ships, and if that was Iranian asymmetric warfare or not, it does seem, that Iran is proving that they're at least have deterrence capabilities at this point. So what do you think that does, if anything, to the U.S. policy and the whole relationship here?
Yeah, I think, and the other thing they have is they have a lot of allies in the region. And, they have Hezbollah right there. They, certainly Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. So this could spread wider, and they're not alone on this. There are other allies that they have and that they can call on. So I don't think they can, I don't think militarily they could beat the United States or anything, but they certainly can create a lot of havoc in that region, especially positioned where they are with the oil industry right there and with the ships coming through there. Any kind of war with them would be, I think, just an economic disaster also for the whole world. And so they can wreak a lot of havoc.
Right. I guess it's important to remember in all this that if the U.S. and Iran do go to war, it's a lot worse for the Iranians than it is for the Americans. But it's just the point that, they could inflict a lot of harm. And we have so many troops in the region. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of Americans whose lives are at stake if we would go to war. And the military capabilities of Hezbollah and what that would mean for the state of Israel, should any kind of conflict break out. It's a pretty crazy thing. And you would really think that would cause the Western countries, and especially like the supposed Israel lovers like John Bolton, to really want to reconsider this position. However, they seem just so committed to it.
Yeah, I think, anything that happens over there is going to be a huge loss of life on both Iranian and throughout the region there, really. It would just create more chaos in that region, which it absolutely don't need. What they need is some stability in that region. And there's no reason, to me, I did business in Iran and in the early 2000s, late 90s, and everything I knew about or had heard about Iran, as far as I was concerned, was absolutely wrong. The Iranian people that I met there and the people we did business with there absolutely were not how they characterized the Iranians on the TV. They liked Americans. In fact, one of the number of people that commented to me was that, we can buy the same product from Europe that you're selling, but we like Americans. We trust Americans. We trust their products. And I never ran into anybody that had any kind of anti-American feeling, or it just, as Scott Horton always says, it doesn't have to be this way. And I really don't believe that it does. If you look at what happened after the JCPOA, how excited the Iranians were that they were going to be able to start trading and dealing with the West. And, so many Iranians came over here and were educated here. When the Shah was, in power, I knew a lot of Iranians that were going to universities here, and a lot of them have been educated in the U.S. and they have been exposed to Americans. Now, there's certainly probably a number of them that are anti-American, but it just doesn't have to be this way. I don't believe the Iranians are our enemies one bit, and I think we could be great friends with them. And I think they'd be more than happy to trade with us and be a part of the trading world. But boy, those hawks just, like Bolton and Pompeo and certainly Israel, everybody in Israel and Saudi Arabia just have a whole different attitude about them.
Well, yeah, that certainly does seem to be the case. And, other than the, American government, it seems that the rest of the world wants to trade with the Iranians too. That's what makes the whole thing just so sad to me, is that, all these European countries really want to do business with Iran. They would have had the U.S. not threatened the secondary sanctions. And it's just so ridiculous to prevent this amount of trade, and would create so much more wealth, not just for the Iranians, but for the people of Europe. And, of course, like you got developing nations like, China and India still, where you have people being lifted out of poverty, and the cheaper energy could get, the better these people's lives are. And it's all being shut off by the U.S. because Donald Trump didn't like the nuclear agreement because Obama signed it. And I really, I'm not one of these guys that just thinks that, Trump always is, does things for racist and sexist reasons. And, he didn't have every position he had because Obama was black and he hates him for that reason. But I really do think he just hates the Iran nuclear deal because, He doesn't like Barack Obama, and it was a good political position to take. And had Donald Trump been the man to negotiate the Iran nuclear deal, you would hear every day, all day, that it was the greatest deal ever negotiated, and he is the greatest negotiator in history because he got a bunch of Iranians to exchange their nuclear program in exchange for money that we already owed them and lifting sanctions to allow everybody else to trade with them, things that everybody else normally gets to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If he would have signed that agreement, I don't know about that here. Everybody says, yeah, well, he just, he doesn't like that it was Barack Obama's deal. Maybe, who knows with Trump, what he's thinking. Maybe that is true. He doesn't like that, but I agree with you. If he would have made that deal, it would be the greatest deal ever. And, it would just be fantastic. But boy, I read the Israeli papers every morning, and if you read those, that is something that they are very afraid of. They constantly keep on the anti-Iran pressure on every news, the Jerusalem Post, the Israeli Times, whichever one you read, it is constant, articles about Iran and against Iran. And that, they obviously have Trump's ear, and they certainly have Bolton and Pompeo's ear, and they're a big influence. And I do think Trump would rather have a deal. I do think Trump is a kind of guy that wants to have a deal, and he'd be happy to have a deal, be able to put his name. It could be the exact same deal. As long as his name's on it, he'd be happy.
Yeah, well, I think one of the really important things about the Israeli influence in the U.S. is that you have a bunch of people in the U.S. who have religious or religious-like beliefs that, that alliance and the Israeli interests are the American interests. And so I think that's one reason the Israeli lobby is like so much more successful than the Saudi lobby. Like, Saudi could, bribe congressmen just like any other industry can. But only Israel really has like the diehard belief of like the Pompeos and Bolton and the Christian Zionists who really believe that Israel has to be there, for the, Judgment Day and everything to happen the way it should.
Yeah, it definitely is a huge influence here, much more than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I think their influence is in Washington, but, out with people, the Israelis have much more, power, especially they have much more with both Democrats and Republicans. They make a very concerted effort to influence both and to try to stay nonpartisan and make sure that they have huge influence in both the Democratic and Republican Party. And and certainly because there's a large Jewish population here, and especially in certain areas, Israel's more important. Saudi Arabia out in the country, you don't hear that like you do Israel. It's in Washington because of the money they spread around.
Right, and they buy an awful lot of weapons. I guess now they're buying the THAAD interceptors. And apparently Donald Trump had a nice conversation with, Marilyn Lockheed is what he called her at one point, the CEO of that company, in the cab of one of those, interceptors. I got a question from Will Porter, who I guess is watching the YouTube feed as we're talking here, asking about the possibility of just trading, I guess, the UK ship for the Iranian ship. I don't know if you saw this, but I guess the Swedes are trying to lead some talks between the US and the UK and Iran to get something worked out to get these ships freed.
Yeah, and you don't know now that with the UK with Boris Johnson now coming in, and I don't know. I think that means Jeremy Hunt's out too. So they certainly could reset, and it seems like it would be an easy thing just to make a trade and just to say, look, we'll release your ship, you release our ship, and we'll all go our own way here. That seems like an awfully easy deal to make. But I even read something today, Britain was calling for, Jeremy Hunt was calling for that, European maritime security. And there was actually a few countries, surprisingly, that I think it was France and Belgium and maybe Spain that signed on to it, even though Germany, with the biggest country there, did not, and other countries didn't. But there were a few countries that seemed to sign on to it. But I'm hoping with Boris Johnson coming in that they'll change their direction here, because it seems like an easy fix. Just trade the ships. That's all they need to do.
Right, and it'll be interesting to see what that European coalition looks like. The big, I thought the surprise of all of it was that the U.S. had already announced they were forming a coalition to do this same kind of thing. And so the Europeans not signing on to the American one suggests to me that has to be somehow different. Either that or they, really thought that the Americans were just going to use this to pit some kind of actual war with Iran. And there's no way in hell they could possibly sign on to anything that's going to get them drug into an actual war, especially after, they seize this ship and then it gets them into, a piracy battle with Iran. It just seems like they probably are going to want to avoid anything too confrontational. From even what I saw after the Iranian ship was seized, the Brits were still saying, yeah, we're looking at diplomacy here. They were making that very clear. Where I think that, if you had that statement coming out of the U.S., you would hear that all options are on the table. We're looking at different military options. We're mobilizing forces in this area or doing this here. And the Brits are just like, yeah, we're going to talk about it and figure it out.
Yeah, I was a little surprised too, because, you would think the EU, that Britain is trying to actually leave the EU would just say, screw you guys, you're leaving anyway. Why would we get involved in this? And we have an agreement with Iran. We're holding to the agreement and we're not going to get involved in this. So who knows what's going on behind the scenes, what pressure they exert, with the US and NATO. But it just seems like an easy one for me to say, the Europeans should just not get involved in this at all. And they should just tell Britain, you know what, you're leaving the EU, you're on your own, deal with the Iranians on your own.
Yeah. I guess, just to kind of finish up here on Iran, my real concern is that what kind of deal is going to be done to fix this problem? I am encouraged by the fact that it seems Donald Trump has signed off on Rand Paul, talking to somebody in Iran. And I did see that Iran floated the idea of signing on to some additional protocols, but I don't think there's anything meaningful Iran is going to actually do. So if, Trump expects them to sign on to some sort of missile agreement or, I don't know, reduce funding for Hezbollah or something like that, it seems very unlikely to me. And so, I guess Donald Trump is the kind of guy that could just flip-flop on everything and tomorrow not care that he thought the Iranian nuclear deal was terrible and going to lead to them getting to a bomb and just sign on to it again tomorrow. But I don't know. See, I just don't see how that it could possibly work out. I guess we only do have a year and a half left of Trump. If the guy doesn't get reelected, maybe the Democrats will be smart and not put up Biden against him. But if they do and Trump gets reelected, it's hard to see how this goes on for the next 5.5 years.
Yeah, you would think too, going in the election, he really wouldn't want to be dealing with this. And just think if, I think Scott mentions this a number of times, if Trump could work out some deal with Korea and then work out some deal with Iran before the election, that'd be huge for him. I think it'd make him much more likely to get reelected than any kind of, ramping up this idea that we're going to war with Iran. I think that's a loser for him, really.
Right. Well, especially when he could just maybe not care about it and stop, just talking about it and, start, maybe not even give waivers, but just kind of under the table start to tell people like, hey, we're not going to enforce, sanctions or something like that as a way to at least maybe get him through the election, and then he can flip-flop however he wants. And in the meantime, there's plenty of peace for him to focus on. I don't know if you've been following the talks in Afghanistan at all and seeing what's happening there, but I've been surprised at how long this has gone on, and that, the U.S. at least seems like at this point they're putting out to the Taliban that, yeah, they're going to leave militarily at some point.
Yeah, it really seems that way. It really seems that they're really trying hard to do this, and Trump really wants it, I think. He made that statement the other day that, we could bomb them and kill them all or whatever. That's just Trump. It's kind of the way Trump talks. It's just kind of who he is, and I don't know if he meant anything by that. But the talk seemed to be moving forward, and it seems like he really wants to put an end to that, which would be great. He should.
Yeah. I'm just hoping for, when we start to get details, the time, frame here isn't too long. I'm worried that they end up with like a 4-year time frame for U.S. troop withdrawal. And then in the meantime, they just find little reasons to stay here a little bit longer, there a little bit longer. I'm sure to some extent the Taliban is a fractured-ish group. And, there's still K. in Afghanistan. So I think there's plenty of excuse, that the Hawks will be able to find and say that, oh my God, Trump's leaving and, letting all these terrible things happen. Short time frame, I think is definitely going to be what it takes to actually end this war. Long time frame, then maybe we get stuck in kind of a forever quagmire kind of thing, kind of like what's going on in Iraq and now, where that level of war certainly isn't what the Americans are fighting in Afghanistan at this point, but we're still flying missions and got troops all over the place.
Yeah, but don't you think, Kyle, if Trump could get some kind of deal with Korea going and then be able to announce, we signed an agreement with Afghanistan before the elections, that this would be a huge, I think a huge benefit for him. It really make him more popular among people. Don't you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I guess a little bit depends on who his opponent is. Because I think like Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders would be smart enough not to like attack him on it, but the rest of them are kind of dumb. And so I think Joe Biden would go after Trump and say, oh, look at this guy getting along with dictators and try to bash him for signing a deal with Kim Jong-un. And every American is going to look at him and say like, yeah, this seems like a good thing, Joe. So if you're against getting along with the North Koreans, we may not be, for getting along with you. And, with Joe Biden's record already in Afghanistan, can you imagine him trying to explain to everybody why we need to stay in that country, why Trump is signing a deal with the Taliban to get out? I think that would, kind of tell people that, hey, the reason that we voted for Trump was the right thing to do is because he was going to be the guy to break all these establishment norms. And this is, old Joe Biden who's just saying that, yeah, I want to go back to the way that things are. So absolutely, if Trump could find a way to do that and just, forget about Iran and Venezuela until the election, that would be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. I think, if Biden is the nominee, Trump could just continue, just say, look, you're the ones that got us to this point. I got us out of it. You kept ramping up. You kept, you were in there for 8 years. You didn't do anything with Korea. You brought us to the point where we were threatening each other and I got us out of it. So I think Trump could use that and just use that against Biden, especially Biden, because he's been there. He was there for 8 years. Like, why didn't you do anything while you were in there? I did something. And it would just, I think you could just bash him with it 100%, constantly bashing him with that.
Right. Well, especially because Biden's role, not only in, I believe he voted for the Iraq war as a senator, and then, as vice president was instrumental not only in Ukraine, because that's a big deal that doesn't get talked about a lot, but Stephen Cohen had a pretty good article on that, The Nation today, that Biden really played a big role in, getting the Maidan protest and then the overthrow of that government in 2014, coup d'etat starting a civil war. But also, in Afghanistan and doing the surge there under Obama that absolutely failed. And look how much territory the Taliban control now and how stupid and unworkable that counterinsurgency was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the Republicans have bashed Obama over that for a long time, saying that he wasn't tough enough on him and he didn't do, which was not true, but that's the line of attack they've used. But Trump, if he could pull off some kind of deal with them and some kind of, at least starting down the road with Korea and ending the Korean War would be huge. I think that would be absolutely huge if he could pull that off. Even if he doesn't sign an agreement with Korea, if he could just end the Korean War and get an agreement with that, I think that would be a major accomplishment for him, and a good one too.
Right. Well, we could talk about that for a minute now too, with Steve Beecham, I believe is how you pronounce his name, now leading the talks with North Korea. There's some optimism for that reason. And we're seeing, some people floating the idea that the U.S., I guess, could just agree to a freeze deal with North Korea. And in that way, rather than demanding that they give up all their nuclear weapons, just have them shut off all their facilities that they could use to make nuclear weapons. And I kind of figured that the North Korean nukes probably aren't particularly advanced, and that could mean that, they'll get rid of themselves over the next couple of decades. But, while they're sitting there dusty on the shelf with the North Koreans having no reason to use them, because the Americans and the South Koreans and everybody else is just trading with them like they're a normal country.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. 100%. I went to grad school, and there was a fellow there who was the head of the Korean student union there, and he didn't speak great English. I always thought he was some communist or something, but he told me, I was talking to him one day, and he said, you know what? He said, the Korean people need to be one people. We are one people, and we need to be one country. And he said, the only thing that stands between us, the North and South being one people, is the United States. And I think if they could work out a deal, that you would find integration between the two countries, and then they wouldn't be our enemies. South Korea is not South Korea could have nukes. We wouldn't care. Maybe Japan would, but we wouldn't. And I think that could happen.
I will say the South Koreans don't even seem all that concerned about it. I mean, it's not like they're pushing to deploy a bunch of, nuclear or missile interceptors in their country, or, saying that we absolutely have to have a hard line that North Korea gives up its nukes. If anything, they're complaining that the U.S. sanctions are getting in the way of inter-Korean relations, saying that, hey, we're trying to build all these nice little peace deals and have, maybe a South Korean bank open a branch in North Korea. And the U.S. is just saying, nope, you can't do that.
Yeah. And it's amazing. It's like, who are we? The South Koreans want it. The North Koreans want it. It's their country. What the hell are we doing over there telling them, no, you can't do this. And, you can't, they want to try to have different trading agreements or trade within each other. And we're saying, no, you can't do that. It's like, what hubris? What? You talk about us being an empire. We should look at the Korean people and say, you know what? North Korea wants this. South Korea wants it. We want it. And we're going to try to facilitate that. We're going to make that happen. That's the way we should be acting.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things I like to say about like kind of the inter-Korean peace, and when everybody brings up Trump's role, I've, kind of say like, look, all Donald Trump is really doing is not getting in the way of what the, Koreans are trying to do themselves. That's been his biggest, benefit, is that rather than doing what Bush and Obama would have done, which is, nope, we're not going to allow any talks of any kind to happen until the North Koreans agree that they have to give up all their nuclear weapons, and then we will talk to them about lifting sanctions. Then there's no reason to talk. And Trump has allowed that not to be the case, and that's allowed talks to happen. But that's a completely ridiculous standard that the president, could just stop talks with any country that he wants like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Trump, I remember when he was being inaugurated, he gave this in his inauguration speech. He talked about that we would. We're for the sovereignty of other countries. We believe in sovereign countries, but we don't act like that. It's like, well, start acting like that. If you believe in that other countries should be sovereign, start treating them like that. Start treating the Koreans like that. Listen to what the Koreans want to do. They want to have an agreement. They want to reunite. Let them. How is that going to hurt us? There's no way it's going to hurt us. They're not going to, if anything, it's just going to make it more peaceful. It's going to make North Korea and South Korea be more integrated. And, we have such great relations with South Korea. They're a good ally. Well, now we'll have great relations with the whole country. What's wrong with that?
Right. And it's not like the North Koreans are going to love, the dictatorship of Kim Jong-un once they realize how rich the South Koreans are. And they have, access and, the ability. If anything, they'll just all start leaving. They're like, oh, we're going to go live with our relatives in South Korea. That's, one thing that you point out there is that a lot of Koreans see themselves as one people. A lot of them have relatives on the other side of the border, because the U.S. and the USSR drew an imaginary line in the middle of that country that really didn't make any sense. And then, those kind of global powers ended up picking this war, splitting that country in half, and then just kind of said that, oh, everybody who's on this side of the line is stuck there forever, and everybody on that side of the line is stuck there forever. And, sometimes families, I think, mothers have been split from children, brothers and sisters have been split apart. And that was one of the interesting things that you had around the Singapore summit was for the first time in, decades, family members were getting to see each other at the DMZ.
Yeah. That was, are you familiar with, Christine Ahn?
Yes.
She's like Women for Peace of Korea or something. She wrote about that quite a bit, that there are relatives that have never seen each other, that they were separated when they were young kids and now they're, older and they're in their 60s and 70s and they haven't seen each other for their whole lives. And these are the kind of things that you could do also that, creates good feelings between the country. Let them open up. Let them do that. Let them have those exchanges. There's nothing wrong with doing that kind of thing. We just seem to in this country, like everything is so, we can't do that. That would be giving in to them. We're giving in to Kim Jong-un, and I just don't see it that way at all. I see these things and say, look, these are the things we should be promoting. We should be encouraging these kind of things because it just leads to a more peaceful world and a more peaceful existence between the two Korean peoples.
Yeah, well, I mean, even when they make the point about giving in to dictators and stuff like that, they can't even explain why it's a bad thing for the American people. They're just like, oh, Trump's getting along with dictators and that must be a bad thing. But if, getting along with dictators brings more prosperity to everybody, in both nations, then there's no reason not to get along better with Kim Jong-un. Isolation isn't the right option. And all they have is kind of that line that's supposed to mean everything. And when in reality, it really means nothing. It always cracks me up that's all they could say. Oh, yeah. Trump gets along with dictators. You're just supposed to assume that that's a terrible thing. And it must be because Donald Trump's, pussy grabbing dope who, just is such a fool that some, little guy like Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin are able to pull one over on him.
Yeah. If you look at East and West Germany, does anybody think that East Germany is any kind of threat to us anymore? I could see Korea going that same route of saying, look, we're going to integrate, we're going to become one people, and we're no threat to the United States. In fact, we're great allies with the United States, and we love the American people, and they love us. And but you have these people that just get in this mindset that we just can't do these things, and you wonder what motivates them. What's really behind that? Is it just some kind of Cold War mentality, or is there something else, some money or something? I can never figure it out. Maybe Kyle.
I really don't. It's really interesting because there's somebody I was talking to, kind of just in normal life about this around the time of the Singapore summit. And they're saying, oh, Donald Trump's going to give up too much. And I said, what can Donald Trump give up? Like, just give me one thing that he could give up during these talks. Is he going to sign Hawaii away to the North Koreans? Like the South Koreans have an army to defend themselves.
Yeah, it's not like they're defenseless.
Right. I think, when you look at conventional capabilities, the South Korean arsenal is far superior. And everybody knows that if North Korea even attempts to use a nuclear weapon, they're going to get wiped off the face of the planet. And so they're not going to pick a fight with the South Koreans because they can't win it. It'll destroy their country. Kim Jong-un will likely be overthrown and murdered in the street like Gaddafi. He's not going to pick that fight. There's nothing for the Americans to give up to the North Koreans other than to let that country be a more normal country. That's the only thing we could do is by allow that country to open up to trade. And so apparently, the North Korean people having more exposure to Western trade would be the worst thing. According to them. I don't know.
Yeah, but it would also be the best thing for the North Korean people too. Because, if you read like Michael Malice's book and it's a pretty brutal regime, and to open it up, I think would truly benefit the North Korean peoples also. And that's really ultimately what we want. We want people to be able to live in, relative freedom and not have to suffer from those kind of brutal regime, because they're so paranoid, because they're always worried that somebody's attacking them, that we're going to attack them or the South Koreans going to attack them. So they clamp down on everybody. They have their own people, and, better relationships, I think, would ease up on that too, would make it much better for the North Korean people. Certainly economically it would. There's no doubt about that. If you look at the economics between North and South Korea, it's night and day.
Right. And maybe they could, start a little bit of dissent if they're not all starving to death.
Yeah.
It's just an idea.
They could stroke him out himself, but.
Right.
So.
Right.
Well, I think the whole Korean thing could be a stepping stone. If he can get something worked out there, then, he's talked about being the big negotiator, and he hasn't shown it. Not in foreign policy. He hasn't negotiated anything. In fact, most of the things he's made worse.
Absolutely.
Getting a deal with North Korea would be a huge stepping stone for him to say, "Hey, I'm the deal maker. I can go make a deal with the North Koreans." We were talking about nuclear, shooting nuclear weapons at each other a year ago, but I made a deal. Now we're friends.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that's probably a good place for to wrap up for this live stream. Thanks so much for joining again. I'll do another one in September. I'm going a little bit more for the middle of the month rather than the end of it next time. But it's been great. And Steven, if you have anything to say to wrap up, if not, everybody check out the blog at the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah, until Will get back on here.
Yeah, we'll guilt him a little bit. He'll be back on next month.
Yeah, he's one of your best interviews, and especially now that he's working with RT, he's got a lot of great info.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Good to be here, Kyle.